of March 21st, 2022. And we'll start off with the land acknowledgement, and I'll look to Councillor Carrier to read that, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. For more than 15,000 years, the First Nations walked upon and cared for the lands we now call home. I'm going to mispronounce this. Anishinaabek, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, I apologize if I mispronounced that, and many others who were families, friends, and communities the way we are today. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the Lake Simcoe-Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and the relationship it establishes with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. We acknowledge the reality of our shared history and the current contributions of Indigenous peoples within our community. We seek to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all of the diverse stakeholders in this area. We seek to do better and to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community, nation to nation. Thank you.
I'll look for a motion to adopt the minutes, and the motion reads the regular meeting, that the minutes of the regular council meeting held February 28, 2022, and the special council meeting held March 10, 2022 be approved as presented. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? I'm going to get a mover and a seconder, so Councillor McLeod and then Councillor Madigan. And did you want to speak to the minutes? Councillor Doherty.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Okay. There's an error in Resolution 073-2022 at the special council meeting where it indicates that I both voted no and abstained, and I only voted nay.
Okay. I see the clerk nodding, so thank you for drawing that to our attention. Any other errors or omissions, Council? Seeing none, then I will call the vote. All in favor? That is adopted unanimously. Thank you very much. And is there any business arising from the previous minutes, Council? Seeing none, that takes us into community announcements, and I'll start with Deputy Mayor Hall.
I have nothing tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McLeod?
I would like to wish everybody a happy vernal equinox, otherwise known as spring, which sprung yesterday, and happy to see so many people at the event at the Awen Gathering Centre as we continue to lift our safety restrictions and return to in-person activities. Let us not forget the 37,000 Canadians who are mourning a loved one who died with or of the virus. And also remember the 998,000 of our American neighbors and cousins who succumbed to it as well, and who continue to at a rate of 1,100 a day. Let us remember what we sacrificed, let us learn our lessons, and let us emerge stronger, smarter, and kinder from COVID.
Thank you, and we continue to live with it, so hopefully we can band together and figure a way forward. Councillor Doherty?
Nothing this evening, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Madigan?
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I thought you skipped me there, but it's all right. It's all right. My community announcement is just welcoming Councillor Carrier to the table. Welcome, Chris, and look forward to serving with you over the remaining months of this term. Thanks for putting your name forward. It's nice to see you stayed in the community with all the things that went on over the past 8 to 12 years. So we appreciate you staying focused and putting Collingwood first. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Councillor Berman? Nothing. Councillor Jeffrey?
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Councillor Hamlin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also wanted to mention the gathering yesterday at the Indigenous Gathering Circle. I attended. It was so well attended. It was a beautiful day. James Carpenter led the event. There were so many Indigenous and non-Indigenous people there. Welcoming spring and celebrating the outdoors as we move into this great time of year. Thank you.
It's great to be kicking off spring, and I understand James Carpenter and Jillian Morris did a marvelous job at the event, so thank you to them. Councillor Carrier?
Thank you, Your Worship. It's my pleasure to sit alongside of you for the remainder of the term, all of Council. As I said in my remarks to you a few weeks ago, that I did vote for actually all 8 of you. One thing that we always hear the term, there's no I in team, but I like to point out the 2 I's that are important to me, which is integrity, inclusiveness, and you have exemplified that over the first 3.5 years of your term. That was in large part why I put my name forward. I'd be proud to serve alongside this team. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have one announcement tonight, and that is just I've got a wonderful donation from Leah Denbach and her father, Tim Denbach. Leah has issued her fourth in the series of Putting a Face on Homelessness, Nowhere to Call Home, photographs and stories of people experiencing homelessness, and she is focused in this edition on people living through the COVID pandemic. All proceeds from the book are donated to charities supporting the homeless, and so I wanted to thank Leah and her dad for the book, but also to thank them for the work they're doing in our community to draw attention to our homelessness and to put a face on this crisis as we continue to work through it. So if people are interested in the book, you can get it online through Amazon and through Indigo and probably Chapters. And as indicated, all proceeds are going to support the homeless. And that brings us then to item 8.1, update on the water capacity and land use planning study. And I'm going to pass it over to Director Slama and Director Valentine to take us through the presentation today. First, do we have Director Slama and Director Valentine with us?
Sorry, thank you, Your Worship. We're just having a technical difficulty right now, just confirming that our viewers are able to hear.
All right, well, I think we'll down tools until we get confirmation that our residents are able to hear us. And we can take this time to welcome our first live attendee at a council meeting. Can you hear us okay? Is my mic on?
Test, check, test.
While we're working through this technical difficulty, I will remind everybody, though, to keep your microphones close to your mouth when you're speaking. Oh, perfect.
We back up? Okay. Well then, now that you've handled that technical crisis, I'll see if we can get Director Slama and Director Valentine in for our water presentation. We have you
Evening, Your
both.
Worship.
Good afternoon.
I'll start this evening with the weekly update, and Director Valentine will jump in.
Perfect. Go ahead, please.
So, thank you. Next slide, please. So, Director Valentine and I will prepare or will give the weekly report on the ICBL and water capacity update. So as per council resolution, with each council meeting, we provide an update on various components that are related to the ICBL and the water capacity. And these include the water supply agreement negotiations and how far along we are in those, items related to the tendering and construction of the new water treatment plant and funding requirements, an update on exemptions requested from the ICBL. And this evening, there is a report related to that. Building permit applications and occupancy permits issued, and remaining water supply as expressed in SDUs and meters cubed. Next slide, please. So our situation today is the same, And that is our water supply for the residents of Collingwood and our customer municipalities is safe and is available. And we do have some water supply that is available for developments, but not a sufficient supply for all of the developments that were in the queue. And so as soon as council was aware of this difficult situation, they took a proactive and transparent approach to seek further capacity and manage the remainder of the available water capacity until our water treatment plant expansion is complete. For this, council used an interim control bylaw to temporarily and transparently pause development so that we can ensure we grow as a complete community. All ready-to-go development applications were approved and most residential renovations and additions can continue. With our chlorine maximized throughout the year, specifically in the winter, and the new UV expected to come online before the end of 2022, we are closing in on the capacity to meet expected growth if the plant expansion is completed at the end of 2025 or early 2026. Next slide, please. So for the components related to water capacity, next slide, please. There's just one bullet here on this slide of information that has changed since last week, but I'll just speak to all of them very quickly. We continue with our discussions and negotiations with New Tecumseh related to our water supply agreement. And we've been endeavoring to have meetings on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, and those are continuing. For items related to our water treatment plant expansion, I'm happy to provide information to council this evening that our drinking water works permit amendment that we applied for to incorporate the UV disinfection has been received. It was received at the end of last week. So that's good news. That's the approval from the ministry to move ahead and install that equipment. The UV equipment, which was pre-selected, has been ordered and fabrication is underway. And the tender for construction of installation of the UV has been issued to our pre-qualified general contractors. The design team and project team with our consultants, AECOM, have started our process of constructability review with our general contractors. We had a kickoff meeting in February, and we'll be having our next meeting to discuss particular design items in April. And site investigation works are wrapping up on site. So these are some of the underground investigations that have been going on. We have received drafts from our consultant that was completed a third-party review of our chlorine addition and approach for tracking services allocation. And that is currently being reviewed by our internal team, and we'll be providing some information on that in a future update to council. Next slide, please. This is our timeline as it relates to the water treatment plant expansion. And this timeline is unchanged this week from last week. The completed items are in the darker blue. Next slide, please. And this chart is a chart of our remaining water supply capacity. This update is as per March 4th. And dependent on decisions that occur this evening regarding the exemptions that were brought forward, this chart will change for next week, but it is the same as it was last week. So currently our remaining allocation is 492 SDUs or 445 cubic meters a day. Next slide, please. Some exemptions have been received during the ICBL. The exemption process was established to get us through the land use planning study and post-study period during the ICBL. Afterwards, water will be managed according to our recommendations and the servicing capacity allocation policy that has been presented to council, pending council's decision on the policy. For developments and individuals who have been granted ICBL exemptions, these have continued through the planning and building permit processes, And those that have not been granted ICBL exemptions, the planning applications have been processed through our internal planning process, and council planning decisions would follow a future exemption or completion of the ICBL. Next slide, please. And at this point, I'll pass it over to Director Valentine. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Slama, and through you, Your Worship, I'll be taking council through the balance of the presentation. So on this particular slide, just a quick reminder that with respect to the land use planning policy study that was initiated expeditiously by council after the ICBL was enacted late last year, the study has recommended 3 implementation products. And these are, first, an update to official plan policies, which are being incorporated into the initial draft of the new town plan, which is now with a targeted release date of late April. The second is a zoning bylaw amendment that provides what we call a backstop to ensuring adequate municipal services are available prior to development occurring, especially when capacity was not previously allocated through a Planning Act application. And then lastly, as Director Slama mentioned, a servicing capacity allocation policy, which provides guidance for capacity-related decisions, such as how, when, through what mechanisms, and for how long capacity would be committed. Next slide, please. So for the past almost year, you've watched this arrow inch along the timeline, and you can see today that we are in the home stretch, having the tools move through to their implementation stages prior to the expiry of the interim control bylaw in late April. And if we move to the next slide, we have more details. So again, as mentioned by Director Slama, today Council is considering the final tranche of ICBL exemption requests, which include industrial, commercial, or institutional conversions that do not require additional water capacity allocation, and also for accessory residential units. And those are the 2 buckets of exemption requests that have been permitted to be evaluated over the past several months. When we get to that item on the agenda, and if it's desired by council, staff can review the 2 amendments to that report since the Strategic Initiatives Committee meeting. At the March 28th council meeting, the servicing capacity allocation policy will be considered for adoption with minor recommended amendments that resulted from the conversation we had with the Development and Operations Committee. And the effective date of that policy, if it's approved by council, would coincide with the expiry of the interim control bylaw. With respect to the zoning bylaw amendment, it was passed in late February, and the last day for appeal is March 29th. If an appeal is received, the ICBL will automatically be extended under the Planning Act until that appeal or appeals are dealt with by the Ontario Land Tribunal. If the ICBL does get extended, staff would bring forward a report to the April cycle with additional recommendations for council's consideration, and that would include matters such as further consideration of exemption requests under the ICBL. Next slide, please. So, Mr. Chair, that does conclude today's presentation. You will likely have noted that the typical slides that we have at the end with the pie charts, including the building permit issuance and status, have been omitted from the past couple of cycles. The Building Services Division is unexpectedly short-staffed by 2 individuals, and they've been operating under these circumstances for about a month now, and it's been a very large impact on the team. So the team is working very hard to deliver on their core duties, maintaining their service levels and ensuring that they keep up with the legislative timelines required for building permit issuance. But we do expect those slides to return to the deck in the next week or so when our building services team returns to full complement. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and both Director Slama and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director Valentine and Director Slama, for the presentation. Council, are there any questions or comments on the presentation today? Seeing none, thank you to both of you for the update, and let's hope our building department gets back up to full capacity soon. And that brings us on to item 9.1, and the resolution reads that the minutes of the following boards be hereby received and the recommendations contained therein be approved. 9.1, Collingwood Public Library Board minutes, February 24, 2022, moved by Councillor Berman, seconded by Councillor Madigan. Any questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, I'll call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. And that takes us over then to section 10.1, Standing Committee Report from our Corporate and Community Services meeting of March 7, 2022. It's a long resolution, so bear with me. The resolution reads that Council received the Corporate and Community Services Standing Committee report from its meeting held March 7, 2022, and hereby approve the recommendations contained within the report as presented. BIA entrance archway, downtown Collingwood BIA, and the recommendation is to support the BIA entrance archway as presented. Community Carbon Footprint Challenge, Collingwood Climate Action Team. The recommendation is to refer the Collingwood Climate Action Team request for $20,000 to staff. C 2022-7 update to temporary street, bracket patio display, and bracket encroachments in the downtown. The recommendations are to extend the use of bylaw number 2020-40 Boulevard Encroachment Permit Bylaw through to December 31st, 2022. And then the resolution from that reads, be it resolved that bylaw number 2022-17 being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 2020-40 to allow for the continuation of the permit encroachment onto the public boulevard within the town of Collingwood be enacted and passed this 21st day of March 2022. And C 2022-10 business licensing bylaw update, food vendors. There's a number of recommendations here. The first is, be it resolved that bylaw number 2022-11, being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 2010-64, business licensing bylaw, be enacted and passed this 21st day of March 2022. Secondly, be it resolved that bylaw number 2022-12, being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 2013-65, special events bylaw, be enacted and passed this 21st day of March 2022. And the recommendation that the moratorium on the issuance of business licenses under business licensing bylaw number 2010-64, Schedule E, food vendors in place until April 30, 2022, be lifted effective the date of passage of the amending bylaw. And finally, FS 2022-1, County Fire Service Review, recommendation that the Collingwood Fire and Emergency Services continue its current delivery model. And I'll have that moved by Chair Madigan and seconded by Vice Chair McLeod. And before I call the vote, as you know, these are all items that were passed unanimously at Council. Is there any item that's, at the Corporate and Community Services Standing Committee, is there any item that Council wishes to pull for a change in direction on them? I see a number of cards, so I'll start with Councillor Hamlin, then Councillor Carrier, and then Councillor Doherty. Go ahead, Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. The item that I wish to have pulled is the BIA entrance archway in the downtown Collingwood.
Okay, so I will sever that item off. And we will deal with the others, subject to comments I receive from Councillor Carrier.
Thank you, Worship. I had the same with the BIA archway, but I also had declared a conflict. FS 2022-01 Fire Services Report, so if that could be dealt with separately, please.
Yep, thank you for that reminder, and we will sever that one off as well. And that brings me to Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Worship. Yes, the item that I wanted to pull was the BIA entrance archway.
All right. So, Council, we are dealing with now the Carbon Community Footprint Challenge, the update to temporary street encroachments in the downtown, and the business licensing bylaw update. So I'm going to call the vote on those matters. All in favor? Those are carried unanimously. Thank you. And what I might do now then is deal with the county fire service review. So Councillor Carrier, we want to step out. We can get that one dealt with. Yes, please. Otherwise, we have a no vote. All right, Council. So calling the vote then on FS 2022-1 County Fire Service Review. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillor Carey, you can come back in. And we will deal now with the BIA entrance archway. And Councillor Hamlin, you wish to speak to that item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to start by saying I'm so thankful for the work the Downtown BIA has done over the years and continues to do in maintaining and improving our downtown. We have a project before us tonight for approval, the arch over an entrance or an entranceway arch at the area of Hurontario and First Street. And the BIA has spent considerable time and energy getting it to the point where it is before us tonight on the agenda. This particular project is a significant one as it will be highly visible. And we know we have received, because we all get the same letters, concerns from various members of our community. And I'm seeking support tonight for a motion I'll bring forward, and I'll tell you what it is in a moment. But I wanted to ask our BIA representative, Deputy Mayor Hull, if he could just comment briefly on the financial aspects of this project.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. Through you to Councillor Hamlin and to all parties who have expressed an interest and the public at large. Just one point of clarification, and that is that we are being asked tonight to support a recommendation that's come forward as opposed to approve. But to answer the specific question as it relates to costs, this is an initiative that has been put forward by the BIA, and the undertaking and costs incurred to date and the costs that would be incurred in the future as it relates to installation and all of the things that go into the development of such an item as it relates to locates, et cetera, would be at the expense of the BIA. The one comment that I would like to share, and it is unfortunate that we find ourselves here tonight and I can't share further, and that is that significant work has gone in to two applications from the BIA as it relates to federal grants. The federal grants that have been applied for are significant in dollars. And I will beg forgiveness if I am stepping out of turn when I say this, but the total sums that we are looking at are in the neighborhood of $700,000. Now, that $700,000 far exceeds the cost of this particular project. So the grants that have been applied for are for a blanket of opportunities that would relate to initiatives within the downtown. When I say we, I am specifically referring to the general manager, Sue Nicholson, and then secondly, the board has put a lot of effort in applying for these grants. And as I say, there has been some encouraging news coming forth from the federal government. These are federal grants as it relates to these two. But I would be in error, or I would be crossing a line to suggest that the green light has been given. But we are hopeful that these opportunities would are forthcoming, and therefore, this specific item that we're discussing tonight not only would be covered by the BIA, as it was stated last week by the presentation of the GM to Corporate and Community Services, but it would be further actually paid for through a grant, if successful, from the federal government. Thank you.
I'll come to you, Councillor. Sorry, pardon me, Councillor Jeffrey?
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Just specific to Deputy Mayor Hull's one comment, could I clarify something? So our support isn't required for the grant applications. Those have already gone in, correct?
Deputy Mayor?
Deputy Mayor.
The grant applications have been submitted, absolutely, yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hammond, any follow-up on that?
Yes, I'll just thank you for your comments, Deputy Mayor. So I have in particular a couple of things. I'm requesting council to support a request for a staff report. And I am thinking the staff report would include a few things. Firstly, advice on whether the appropriate process has been undertaken in terms of, particularly on my mind, is consultation in adding the significant feature to our downtown area. Secondly, it goes without saying that our downtown's going to look quite different in 10 to 15 years. We see the signs of it now. And given we know it will look different, how will this arch fit into that? And so where my mind goes is, should we, and this is part of what I'd be asking our staff to comment on, should we be considering a visioning exercise that would, of course, would include the BIA for our downtown, so we could see what our future is going to look like as our community predicts, and see if this particular design and structure would fit into that visioning for our future. Now, I know this is not what the BIA would want to hear, so I would also be asking for a quick staff turnaround on this advice. I would like our CAO to be able to weigh in on it. She's away this week, so would be back, I believe, Monday, which would be too soon to have her input. So I would be asking for the next turnaround of such a staff report on the first council meeting following her return next Monday.
All right, I'll look for a seconder. Councillor Carrier, and then I'll open the floor to comments. Council on the amendment now. Deputy Mayor?
Maybe through you to either the clerk or to our treasurer, who is with us this evening in an acting capacity as our CAO. How does this request potentially affect decisions that have already been made and potentially affect the outcome in terms of whether or not, well, I shouldn't say this, it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not we would receive the grants, though that has already been applied for and is forthcoming in terms of either a yes or a no. But if the good news is yes, and then we're waiting on a report, what does that do to the process that has already been undertaken with works done to date? Because I believe, and just so everyone is aware, as part of the presentation last week to Corporate and Community Services, there was either clear reference or reference made to the fact that a timeline of spring, summer in terms of start and completion was already looked at. And I know that there have been costs already undertaken to move this project forward. So I want to be clear that if we're looking to refer this to staff to come back with comment, what is it that we're specifically looking for? And does that in fact actually determine something that has already been set in motion? Because as I started with my very first comment to the first question, we're being asked tonight for support in the form of an endorsement. We're not being asked for approval. One final thought, and that is I'm asking this question just for clarity, with full respect of the intent in which Councillor Hamlin is asking her question.
Clerk Almas, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. To address Deputy Mayor Hall's question, it has been presented within the BIA's budget presentations annually since 2019. And again, last year they committed to the funds, the partial funds coming out of 2021 and the remainder coming out of 2022. And again, I know that they have application before the province to also receive additional fundings that could be allocated towards this. The contract was put out by RFP, and it was awarded last October by resolution and came forward to the Corporate Community Services and towards to Council. I believe that the contract was almost $130,000. A significant amount of that has been already invested, and I believe that they're hoping for installation in June of this year. And further to the BIA MOU, I might add, sorry, Your Worship, is to confirm that there was no stipulation on the process identified at the time that Council agreed to or approved the BIA's budget on the process that would happen. However, within the MOU, it indicates that Council needs to support or endorse a infrastructure being added to town property.
Follow-up, Deputy?
No, that was quite clear.
Okay. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Let me start by saying that I absolutely appreciate the work that has gone into this project. I also know how long it has been discussed, because I do recall it being discussed during the last term of council when I was sitting on the BIA board. That said, it's not often where we get a very, very strong negative feedback from the community about any particular initiative. And so I think it warrants some pause before we proceed further. And my thought was along the same lines as what Councillor Hamlin has proposed, but perhaps in a different order. And my thought was that perhaps we could undertake a consultation via Engage Collingwood on the current design and ascertain whether, in fact, the comments that we have seen abounding in social media are, in fact, broad-based, or whether it is only among a vocal few. At which point in time, I think we could all move ahead with a little bit more confidence that it is a good initiative for the downtown. It satisfies the objectives, but more importantly, it satisfies the community, because it is all of our downtown. And then if the consultation shows that more work needs to be done at that point in time, then I would be likely to suggest then we pursue a staff report as to what possible next steps could be.
We've got the one amendment on the floor, and so if that amendment is defeated, then I'll come back to you on that front. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. I just, through you to Councillor Doherty, I just want to I think, differentiate between design and sort of all of the other things that are behind this. Going to the public on such an issue, and I know I'll get lit up for saying this, can oftentimes be dangerous. And that is that, a body is put in place to, do the work and move things forward, and we're elected to make decisions. And that's one of the reasons, I'm not in favor of plebiscites and things of that nature. That's not to say that community consultation doesn't have a place and is warranted. And I think that Engage Collingwood has proven that out and has been very successful in that respect. The issue that I'm wanting to address, though, is the commentary, and that is that when I looked at sort of some of the comments that were being made online, I think that there was commentary that was quite clear in the sense that, you know, it was misguided. The individual who was commenting clearly didn't either read or didn't appreciate or understand, for example, who was actually paying for this. So that's one issue. The other issue is in terms of, say, the process and the consultation. I think that as part of the consultation process, whether it was broad enough, whether it was deep enough, the partners that go into making a decision, in this case, have all been consulted. So the museum was consulted, the Heritage Committee was consulted, our fire department was consulted, and the list goes on. So that we had representation and comment from a technical aspect, but also from a cultural and aesthetic perspective. And they have all signed off on this. So it then comes back to its place, I guess, from a design standpoint. And before I comment on that, I should actually maybe just step one step further back, and that is to the genesis. Some of the comments that have been made by members of the community who are, highly respected, long-standing members, have spoken to, the cultural value, the architecture, and the fact that, we have a gem. And I don't think that anybody can dispute that. But there were a number of studies that were actually initiated by the BIA to look at one of the challenges that our downtown actually faces. And that is that we have competing interests in the sense that we have the Village at Blue, and by extension of that, we've got commercial entities, to the west in Thornbury, et cetera. And we've got First Street, or Highway 26. And for a long extended period of time, there has been great discussion amongst BIA members that for as wonderful a downtown as we have, and the jewel that it represents, those who are necessarily coming to our community are not, in fact, actually finding it. And they're maybe confusing First Street with Hurontario. And that's quite a common theme. You hear that from other communities where bypasses or gasoline alleys have been created, and people associate gasoline alley with a downtown when in fact they're not. And/or we've got this entity out to the west that is a huge drawing card, and it's a blessing and curse in the same breath. The blessing is that they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on advertising, bringing millions of visitors to the area, who are migrating out to the west and are in many cases bypassing the commercial core of the community. So I am not suggesting by putting an archway across Hurontario that is going to somehow all of a sudden be a gravitational North Pole, and as somebody's coming along the parkway, will automatically turn left and go downtown. That would be very naive of me. What I am saying is that there was several reports put together that identified the challenges as it related to the core, commerce, traffic flows, traffic studies, and how we could better create wayfinding within the broader downtown. And so some of these things have already been produced, they've been implemented, and we've started to see them. We've got way better signage as it relates to our parking. We've got some really innovative signage as it relates to moving people around and discovering, whether it's discovering the downtown, discovering the harbor, et cetera. We've got things that are embracing technology so that we're using a standard sign, but at the same time are interactive to allow people to engage and find better information as it relates to discovering our community. And this archway was part of that presentation and part of that recommendation, that it added an element of wayfinding in the physical sense, but it added an element of beautification for the downtown. I'm speaking only for myself when I say this, and that is that last week, when the presentation was made, the diagram that ultimately was then used and made its way to the papers showed a diagram that was very two-dimensional, and I don't think was a true representation. And so I won't speak specifically to the sign, but I will speak to the two bricks foundations on either side, and they look superimposed, and that's not the case. And I think if we looked at some other design elements within the downtown, there is a representation of, how the foundation, how the supporting infrastructure would look, tie in quite nicely. So the brickwork, there's been great conversation about brickwork, specifically tying in, say, to the building on the west, which is Loblaw, and then the buildings on the east side. I guess it's what used to be known as Noble In-Store Insurance.
I'm only going to interrupt to say that you've gone through your 5 minutes, but as
I'm
chair,
sure I've
I'm going to
gone
let
through
you go
10.
into your second 5 minutes because you are a BIA representative, and I want to make sure that you provide the BIA's perspective. So I'm going to give you the additional time.
Okay,
Go ahead.
I appreciate that, and I'm gonna see if I can get Mr. or Councillor Madigan maybe to get you a clock for behind you so I can have a reference point. So otherwise, I'll take the full 20, 25. Anyway, I appreciate where the sentiments that are being raised this evening, and if it's the will to refer this to our senior staff for further comment, then that's the will of council. But I do believe that we've gone down far enough of a process. Monies have been expended, and approvals from the necessary, municipal persons have been put in place, that I think we're in a very difficult position to, at this point, at the very, least, endorse. They're not looking for approval. They're looking for an endorsement at this point. I appreciate the latitude. I've well exceeded my time, and I'm happy to listen, and I'm happy to answer other specific questions if there are. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I know I've got other cards going up, but I think that question came from you, Councillor Doherty, or who did that question come from that went to the Deputy Mayor? Just saying. Yeah. Was that from you? Okay. So if you have any follow-up,
yes, I do.
We'll move on.
Thank you. And I appreciate the comments that the Deputy Mayor has made, and I have no argument that some of the criticisms that we have seen might have been misguided or misinformed. No argument. I have no argument with the purpose of the sign. I have no argument with the bodies that were consulted as part of the process. So the museum, the Heritage Committee, Fire, Public Works. But I do believe that this response, the public response, has been exceptional. And so I think maybe we forgot to consult the public. And at this point in time, I see very little harm and very little expense in using Engage Collingwood to gauge the sentiment in the community. And if it looks as though the majority are very supportive, then we move forward. If not, now is the time to take a second look, not after it's up. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, I've got that, and in terms of, we've got one amendment on the floor, so we can deal with a subsequent amendment after that's been dealt with. Next, I've got Councillor Madigan, then Councillor Carey, and then Councillor Berman. Are we missing anyone? Yeah, you as well? And Councillor Jeffrey? Okay. So I'll start then with Councillor Madigan.
Thank you very much, sir, and through you to everybody. My comments are the negative impact that should be addressed through this could be with an education of where the funds come from. We, for the last two councils, have had a very open and active communication with the public, and every time that it came in front of a committee, we have offered them to come and chat with us, and there has been little to no backlash up till now. I've read some of the social media. You all know how I feel about social media. I do not live or die by it. It is just a reflection of a stagnant program that I read. The work has been done. Everyone has had an opportunity, and I think this should be supported. The comments that I read are, I don't like it, and then people would say, well, what do you want to see? I don't know. I personally don't like it, but I'm not elected to give my personal opinion. I'm elected to support the whole of the electorate. So I will be supporting this. As the deputy mayor so eloquently stated, they're not looking for anything other than just this. They've done the work. It's been open to the public. They could have come to any of the committees from 2018 on, and they just didn't. And so I think their time has passed, unfortunately. The BIA works very hard in this community, and they do a lot of things that nobody knows about. They pay for the garbage cans downtown, and the day that they hit the ground, they become the town of Collingwood's property. So I'm not sure if everybody knows that. So the BIA has thrown a lot of money into this. As I said, I think it's not in the right spot. But that being said, I'm not elected to give my personal opinions. It's not my town, it's our town. And the BIA has worked very hard over 4 years to bring this. And it's been actually for a lot longer. They've wanted to make a status symbol or an impact zone. So again, I will support it personally, not for me, but as a town, I will. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Councillor Carrier.
Worship. Just a question of clarification through you to the clerk. Memorandum of understanding, despite the budget process, despite the process that has been to date, put a structure in the downtown. It's not a recommendation. They do require our approval. So council should approve the IA archway as presented, not support a recommendation.
Clerk Thomas?
Certainly. Thanks, Your Worship. To address a question, I actually am taking the support and approval as the same. I know there's been differentiation here, but the direction that's needed is that council supports the infrastructure being placed at that location.
I think just
Go ahead.
comment on your comment, just to clarify, that we said that we're supporting a recommendation and they're not looking for approval. I just want to make sure that it requires our approval.
I'm going to look to Clerk Thomas to confirm that answer.
Correct.
Yeah. And I know just before you get on, Deputy Mayor, you wanted to speak to that specific point?
Thank you. My understanding legislatively is that you are correct, but the approval has been given. This came through Corporate and Community Services on a couple of occasions through the budget process of the BIA, to which then came to council for full approval. So tonight is simply an endorsement of a project that has already prior been approved and is ongoing. And as was referred earlier, I believe, by the clerk, a specific dollar amount has already been committed and spent.
I'm going to come back to you. Clerk Thomas, are you able to confirm in the prior iterations that this has come before, first of all, the Corporate and Community Services and then Council, what was the impact of those resolutions? Are you able to clarify that?
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. I think this is a difficult one, and I appreciate the Deputy Mayor's comments. So Council approves the BIA's budget. The BIA present the budget. They have to approve by bylaw their budget, and they didn't specifically approve by resolution a BIA installed archway on town property. They approved a budget of $500,000 being spent the way the BIA has indicated that they would spend that money. So basically, that's where the approvals came from. Generally, in the resolutions for the minutes from meetings, they are presented. The recommendations are carried that are approved within them. Generally, they're pulled out. I'd have to go back and check from August of 2021, but it was put forward that they were confirming their contract for $128,900 for this project.
Okay, thank you for that information. Go ahead, Councillor.
I have a couple of comments, and my email went live Monday afternoon. I've had some emails regarding this, calls, and I've also seen some of the comments, and I will readily admit that I was unaware of this. Can you hear me now?
Better, thank you.
I will readily admit to all of you that I was unaware of this project, and I do find myself to be a rather regular watcher, tuned into the things. So I really do appreciate the feedback that I've received from Deputy Mayor Hall and Mayor Saunderson with the timeline starting back in 2016 to just last week. And it's much appreciated. I moved here in 1977, and the following year, the downtown was redone. And I'm thinking, I moved here in 77, and there was a ship at the end of the street. It was a beautiful town. What are they doing the downtown for? It looked great, but it was a beautiful downtown. And 30 plus years later, I was fortunate to lead a council that made a decision to reinvest in the downtown core in partnership with a strong BIA. And it was a $10 million project. $7 million, I believe, was approximately in grants, and $2 million from the town, and $1 million from the BIA. But the one thing that we did do that I'm not seeing on this timeline is that we did have a lot of public information sessions and communications. And what I'm seeing here, respectfully to everyone, is I have to agree with Councillor Doherty's comments that I didn't see a lot of consultation with the public. Now, maybe that's because I didn't look close enough, but I still didn't see it on the Engage Collingwood website. And it's an effective tool for those of us on outside looking in, trying to get information from you. My personal view is the downtown looks pretty darn nice the way it is. My personal view is that I'm not a fan of the arch, but I only saw it a couple of weeks ago, and I guess I'm going to have to get used to it if it moves forward, because at the end of the day, the downtown, as beautiful it is, it's only made better by the merchants and the people that populate it. So I would like to see a little more public consultation and feedback. I understand social media. I've watched you guys take it on the chin from social media unfairly in a number of corners. And I get that aspect of the dialogue, but I like your Engage Collingwood tool, and I would support Councillor Doherty's recommendation for just a minor pause to get some more public feedback, because most of the public feedback I've received is negative. I also want to comment that I did submit 4 questions that were answered and was copied to all of you, and so that the public is aware of it. I did ask if it required a sign bylaw, if our sign bylaw still existed. The answer was yes, the bylaw exists. 2, it doesn't require it because it's a structure, so it's getting a building permit instead of a sign bylaw. I asked about costs because it was unclear, and there's been great communication back on the various costs, who was picking up the costs for the electrical relocates and the water main issue, and those are all costs being absorbed by the BIA. And then our chief building official did comment a little more on the sign and building permit and the engineer drawings that were going to be included for that permit. So all of that from your great staff, our great staff, I certainly appreciate that information. But if the resolution moves forward tonight, I'm a no vote.
Thank you, Councillor Carrier. Councillor Berman. Oh, you didn't have your card up? All right. Then Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. One of which actually has to do with the BIA itself, because I think there's been a bit of turnover in the membership of the BIA in the last little while. I know we appointed 2 new people just like 2 weeks ago, and I understand there's some discussion there. Would it be of assistance, and this is through you, Mayor Saunderson, to Deputy Mayor Hall, would it be of assistance to the BIA to take a tiny pause to consult so that the new members can get up to speed?
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Actually, I appreciate that question because it allows me maybe to speak to the amendment without actually addressing it procedurally. No, and I say that with the utmost respect to the 2 most recent appointees and the 2 who have just been appointed, who have yet to meet with us. And that is that if there was a concern or if there were questions to be raised, I would respectfully suggest that they be done, say, within the next week, to be answered at council next week, and that would relate to, one, getting an exact figure in terms of the dollars that have been spent to date. 2, how any decision made by this body or any other would impact potentially the grants that have been applied for. 3, if we were to go down the path of a broader public consultation through Engage, how would that impact the decision, the planning, and execution that has already been rolled out for the spring and summer? So I think if those sort of, no pun intended, are overarching questions could be answered in the next week, it may give better comfort to this council in terms of whether you choose to support or not, where we are exactly within the process. And so again, I don't think, and I appreciate the question, the 2 that have just been appointed and the 2 most recently, although those 2 have been very active and engaged, there's really no value in sort of stepping back in that respect. But I appreciate that. So.
Follow up.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Saunderson, then. So you're saying that the BIA would be amenable to a week if we were to defer a decision on this to the 28th, in hopes of mollifying our colleagues?
One of these days I will look up the word mollify.
Bye?
No, I don't want to say to you that I'm speaking on authority that a week would do it. What I'm saying is that I think if we were to request a staff report tonight that would come back to SIC or a future council meeting into April, for example, or even further out, I mean, we know what's on the docket for staff to be looking at and working on at this point. What I'm saying is I do think it's reasonable to suggest, and I'm going out on a limb, that if we could have sort of those high level questions answered in the next week from the general manager, it may help to assist in terms of having a full picture of exactly what costs have been spent. Therefore, what liabilities in terms of if the project was I don't want to suggest canceled, but maybe suspended or was pushed back, would there be penalties incurred? If you were to ask me, and I appreciate the question in advance, if you were to ask me, for example, would we incur penalties for the design or for any works in terms of construction, I don't know the answer. I couldn't tell you that tonight. But I think those are questions that could be answered within a week's period, and we could have this conversation, a week Monday. And again, if it's the will to move forward, it's the will to move forward. And if it's not, based on those or that information, at least I think people would be they'd be more comfortable in making the decision that they want to make.
Follow-up.
Yes. So 2 comments and a follow-up. I bet there are people who don't like the rhino that we approved and who are going to have things to say when it goes up. And I bet that there are people who would have had things to say about the Seawood sign that we all now love so much had it been put forward in this sort of forum. It just showed up one day that I know of and is awesome and is a tourist attraction, I think, of itself. So I suspect we're going to see some people taking selfies underneath this arch, probably right after they visit the Seawood sign. However, I am sensitive to the concerns of my colleagues, and so I would like to see perhaps a mini staff report from General Manager Nicholson, if that's at all possible. And so I will move that we defer this decision to March the 28th.
Yeah, so we've got an amendment on the floor. I'm going to bump your deferral, and I will come back to it after we've dealt with the amendment that is on the floor. So unless there's any further comments or questions, I've got Clerk Almas. Go ahead.
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. And I would require, I see Councillor Hamlin did have her hand up as well. I need clarification whether Councillor Hamlin was first looking at a deferral or a referral as well. And secondly, a request for a staff report would be required as a notice of motion. So she could still put the notice of motion on the floor that could be considered following receipt of any additional information, should we have it in time for the meeting on the 28th.
Right, and I'm just going to ask a procedural question because this is already on the agenda. And my understanding is that Councillor Hamlin pulled this to go for a change of direction. So it seems to me that no notice of motion would be required to get a staff report. So I just need to clarify that because my understanding is under the procedural bylaw, when something's on the table and we're bringing a motion to change the direction, I don't know that it would need to go through a notice of motion process, would it?
Thank you, Your Worship. So our new section 4.19, notice of motion shall be filed in writing with the clerk and shall be added to the next agenda. Notwithstanding the written inclusion of a notice of motion on agenda, any member may verbally provide a notice of motion during a council or committee meeting should it pertain to an item considered on the agenda and provide written or digital copy following the meeting to the clerk.
Yes, I guess, but just to be clear, we have a recommendation on the floor, and our procedural bylaw says that if somebody wants a change in direction of that recommendation, this is their time to speak. So isn't this really a change of direction?
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. It also goes on to say notice of motion that require actions from staff need to include a preamble identifying how it aligns with town's strategic plan or departmental budget priorities and business plans as approved by council. So this was the most recent change in the December changes to the procedural bylaw.
Okay, I guess, and we can take this offline, but I guess really my quandary is this a notice of motion when the item's already on the agenda and we've invited changes of direction? But I'm prepared to deal with that later. So I'm going to go back to Councillor Hamlin. To get clarification on what exactly you were requesting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had requested a staff report so that we could firstly hear back whether the appropriate process has been followed, particularly in terms of consultation. And I do appreciate Councillor Madigan's suggestion that people could have gone to committee meetings and that the BIA budget has been approved from time to time, of course, as is required by council. But this is the first time this matter's come to this council, and we've seen what is actually being proposed. And this, why is our council approval required? because it's on town property. So the buck stops here, and as much as it is convenient, I'll say, to say our staff has looked at it in terms of can a fire truck fit under it, and not to minimize what they've looked at. But really, the approval of this project is up to us. It's our town property. This is the first time we've looked at it. We have not consulted with our community. And so what I'm asking for, just to rephrase, is a staff report that tells us, have we followed the appropriate process to get it to this stage here tonight? And the second part of it is, given our downtown is in transition, should we be undertaking a visioning exercise with the BIA as to what kind of significant street improvements should be undertaken that will fit in with a vision that will last us for decades to come, and that the turnaround time for the staff report be within, I'd say, the first SIC meeting in April. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'm taking that as a referral back to staff, in which case we don't have debate on the motion. It's a referral back to staff, but on the procedural issue of the staff report, I guess as chair, I understand what the comments from Clerk Almus about the notice of motion, but it seems to me this is a change in direction. What's being requested is a referral back to staff for a report on the process that was followed to get us to date here and whether or not further steps are required. With that being said, with that clarification, I'm going to look to the seconder. Who was the seconder? Was it Councillor Carrier? All right. So, Councillor Carrier, you're good with that clarification?
Yes, Your Worship, I am. I would consider it a referral as well.
All right. So it's a referral back to staff for a report that would come back in our SIC meeting in April. What's the date of that meeting, Clerk Almus?
Certainly that is not a large turnaround time. That agenda will be distributed next Wednesday. I will, April 4th is the date.
April 4th. All right.
Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
If I may, I think it'd be pretty simple to put together a timeline of the process and basically from the time that it was presented, how the budget was approved, their RFP process and whatnot. I think the piece that's missing is the public consultation, and there's no requirement for public consultation. So that's what ultimately, in my opinion, the report's going to say is that yes, there was a public consultation. There was a design review committee that the BIA did put together with members of the Heritage Committee and the Museum Committee on vetting the look of it, but there was no public consultation. So the question is, if public consultation is requested, do you want the BIA to undertake the public consultation and advise council on the results, or do you want the town to work jointly with the BIA on undertaking public consultation? Those are just some pieces that I've gathered.
Yeah, and I would think those would be items that would be identified in the staff report. And I think what might also be helpful in that staff report is understanding what costs have been incurred to date and what delays, what implications would be from a delay, if that delay happens, so that we have an understanding. I mean, the process that we've had so far has gone through standing committee. It has gone through, my understanding is our processes. Our relationship with the BIA has been solidified through a new MOU. And I think what we're looking at is whether at the end of the day, council considers that additional public consultation is necessary, and then who would lead that. And I would think that might be something that comes through the staff report. Okay, Councillor, we're on a referral here, so.
Yes, I understand that, Mayor Saunderson, but you missed me in the list of speakers, so I'm just going to take the opportunity now just to speak to specifically the public consultation piece.
Sure, go ahead, please.
I think also if staff would consider the necessity somehow of going back with respect to the MOU going forward and how we address these issues on town property with the BIA and put in a process, because I think we're kind of in the position now of trying to close the barn door after the cows are out. So I think that if we can add that consideration as to clarify going forward what that process should be, so we're not in this position again.
Thank you for those comments, and I'll look to Councillor Hamlin. You're nodding your head, so you friendly amendment then to that?
Totally agree, Mr. Mayor.
All right, and we'll look for a seconder to confirm that. Good. All right. Well, we've had lots of discussion, so then I'm going to call the vote then. Last comment to our BIA. Right?
Not a comment, question through to the clerk,
Yep.
and that is I would, or our acting CAO, I would respectfully request that if it is passed, that the question, and I'd be happy to either ask it or if staff could reach out to the BIA, but I won't want to know the clarity as it relates to what we're doing here tonight and moving forward as it relates to the grant applications that have been made and whether or not this in any way would jeopardize. And I'm simply asking the question based on this municipality's history in dealing with federal government grant applications. It's not a good one.
All right. I see heads nodding, so I think we've got that included. All right. That being said, we've had a good discussion. I will call the vote then. All in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you. And as indicated numerous times throughout the discussion, we want the BIA to recognize or to know that we recognize all the hard work you put into this, and we will be pushing forward with this. All right, that brings us then to item 10.2, Standing Committee Report, Strategic Initiatives Meeting of March 7, 2022. It's another long resolution. It reads that Council received the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee report from its meeting held March 7, 2022, and hereby approve the recommendations contained within the report as presented. CAO 2022-5, Collingwood World Summit, Habitat and Towns, and the recommendation is to endorse the MOU for the 3rd Collingwood World Summit, Habitat and Towns 2022 with Urban Economy Forum Association and approve a one-time payment of $50,000 to Urban Economy Forum Association following the signing of the MOU and endorse in principle continued work on the Collingwood World Summit and Sustainable Development Goal number 11 pilot projects, pending funding or alternate agreement with the Urban Economy Forum and UN Habitat. Second item is CAO 2022-6, Interim Control Bylaw number 2021-24, exemption requests. Commercial projects with no additional water capacity and accessory residential units. Recommendation that the lands identified as 14 Bush Street, 22 Woodcrest Avenue, 122 Collins Street, and 19 Cameron Street be exempt from the provisions of Interim Control Bylaw number 2021-24 and added to the Bylaw Schedule A for the purpose of establishing accessory residential dwelling units with an additional water capacity allocation of 0.66 single detached unit equivalents for each property. Second recommendation is that the lands identified as 172 and 174 Huron-Ontario Street be exempt from the provisions of Interim Control Bylaw number 2021-24 and added to the Bylaw Schedule A for the purpose of establishing a hotel and hotel lobby, i.e. the Dorchester Hotel, with no additional water capacity. And this was an amendment from the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee on the March 7, 2022 meeting that was passed unanimously. Third recommendation is that the lands identified as 380 First Street be exempt from the provisions of Interim Control Bylaw number 2021-24 and added to the Bylaw Schedule A for the purpose of establishing office and retail uses with no additional water capacity. And that also was an amendment from the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee of March 7, 2022 that was passed unanimously to address an additional application. Fourth recommendation is that the rural residential units identified as 61 Slalomgate Road be exempt from the provisions of Interim Control Bylaw number 2021-24 and added to the Bylaw Schedule A for the purpose of establishing a new detached dwelling with no additional water capacity in recognition that municipal services are not available or anticipated in the near future and that limited rural residential growth is permitted in the applicable planning instruments. Fifth item, therefore be it resolved that bylaw number 2022-18 being a bylaw to amend interim control bylaw number 2021-24, be enacted and passed this 21st day of March 2022. Next item is C 2022-8, Joint Compliance Audit Committee Report, 2022 Municipal and School Board Election. Recommendation is that the Town of Collingwood participate in the Joint Compliance Audit Committee facilitated and administered by the committee or the County of Simcoe, and a bylaw be presented by or to Council by October 1st, 2022 to establish and appoint members to the Joint Compliance Audit Committee. Next item, PW 2026-6, Water Treatment Plant Expansion, updates to scope and budget. The recommendation is that the staff proceed with the design of all recommended scope changes, and the 2023 capital budget include updates to the funding requirements for the water treatment plant expansion project, and staff communicate the incorporation of additional costs in the water supply negotiations and agreements with the customer municipalities. Next item is T 2022-1, 2021 Statement of Remuneration paid to council and appointed board members. And the recommendation is to receive the report for information. Final report is C 2022-9, Election Sign Bylaw Update, and the recommendation is to receive the report for information. There are other items that come out of that did not pass unanimously. So all of those items passed unanimously at the Strategic Initiatives Committee meeting, and I'll look to the Deputy Mayor to move that. And can I get a seconder, please? Councillor Madigan. So are there any items that the council wishes to pull for a change in direction? I've got Councillor Jeffrey and then Councillor Carrier. Go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, and I'm not sure it's a change of direction, except that it was an amendment that wasn't considered by the committee at the time, and I think staff alluded to the fact that 381st Street was missed in that report, and if I'm incorrect in that, I was just thinking we should have the separate report that Director Valentine offered in her original presentation of the ICBL presentation.
All right.
Because it'll be the first, if I'm correct, then it would be the first time it's been considered or been available, and probably not soon enough for public input.
I'll look to staff, Director Valentine. What's the status of 380 First Street?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, and to also respond to the councillors' questions. There's a couple of amendments that probably should be highlighted tonight if that's appropriate to provide staff the opportunity. 174 Huron-Ontario Street was recommended for an exemption, but 172 Huron-Ontario Street, which is the hotel lobby of the Dorchester, remained as an outstanding question, which staff were to investigate. And the second amendment, which wasn't discussed at the SIC meeting at all, as indicated by the councillor, was an application for the Crozier building, which was intended to come forward to a different standing committee, but due to a variety of circumstances, we weren't able to do so. So it would be, in my opinion, appropriate to speak to that second amendment as well.
Okay, thank you for that. So you've got your motion on the floor, and we will deal with that, I think, separately. We'll go through the recommendations and then I'll come back to 380, and then, but I will ask for clarification, Director Valentine, on 172, just because that motion is on the floor. Is that to be included or not?
Thank you, Your Worship. And staff did take away the question posed by the committee and reviewed the documentation provided by the applicant, and do feel it is appropriate for 172 to also be included collectively as a bundle with 174 to ensure that the Dorchester Hotel in its entirety can move forward as envisioned by the applicant. We are satisfied that no additional water capacity would be required, and therefore have recommended the amendment to the resolution.
Thank you very much. So I will come back to you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Carrier.
Thank you, Your Worship. PW 2022-06, please.
Yes, what part of it? So did you say PWC or CAO?
PW
22, got it. Okay, on the next page.
Expansion?
Yes. What would you like to see done with that?
I have a question of clarification to staff, which will likely result in not supporting the recommendation.
Okay, so I'm going to sever that. Are there any items to be pulled for a change of direction? Seeing none, the motion is on the floor, so I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. So I'm first going to go to PW 2022-6, Water Treatment Plant Expansion. I'll go to you, Councillor Carrier.
Thank you. And I, once again, will apologize to all of you. I realize that I'm coming late to this discussion and I'm not privy to the information since 2010. What I did ask for when I looked at the various appendixes, and staff have done a tremendous job of cost allocation or apportionment to what's ours, what's somebody else's, and what's somebody else's as you go through this. The difficulty that I'm having is I did ask for a copy of the expired agreement, thinking that it was a new agreement that I had never seen, and it is the one that was sent to me today via staff, was from 1999. It went for 20 years. So, I mean, I was on council when that agreement was signed, and I was also had the privilege of sitting as mayor while we tried to negotiate a fairness deal of the water agreement between ourselves and New Tecumseh. My issue, and if I'm out of line, please stop me. My issue is with the interim water supply capacity, which is included in Appendix A, the top line. It's a $2.2 million cost, and it's 100% being borne by the town of Collingwood. So we're going to get into my understanding of the benefit of use, and that we were selling surplus water. We were not selling a guaranteed supply of water to New Tecumseh. My understanding, having sat there since 1999 to 2010, respectfully to everyone that's here, and I'm once again going to echo that I'm not privy to the information you've been privy to the last several years, was that if development got to a point that we had to pick between ourselves and New Tecumseh, the choice would be ourselves. And there is no cost sharing here between ourselves and New Tecumseh to add more capacity using the interim UV. So from my perspective, we are not being treated as fairly as we should be. From your perspective, you may be, but I can't support the resolution as presented with the information that I've received to date and the information that I received this afternoon. Same agreement that I was aware of and helped participate in 1999.
Fair enough, and I will pass it to Director Slama, but my understanding of the UV disinfection was a way for us to level off our production year-round so we don't suffer a shortfall in the winter, and that those SDUs are staying in Collingwood until the new plant is opened, at which time the UV disinfection units will be incorporated in the new plant, and there will be some cost sharing there. But I will pass that over to Director Slama.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Councillor Carrier, I would agree with your comments, and I can add some further comments for perspective. So we don't currently have a water supply agreement with New Tecumseh. That is true. And the previous, by the previous agreement that we had with New Tecumseh, which expired in 2020, there was a provision for New Tecumseh to be receiving actually more than the 9,500 cubic meters per day than what they receive today. So I'm going to say back in 2008, that capacity allocation to New Tecumseh was held, and it didn't increase as it as was provided for in the water supply agreement because of different situations in Collingwood at the different points of time where there wasn't the ability to provide more water to Tecumseh and still meet our own needs here in Collingwood. So, at approximately this time last year, when we looked at our situation, and we brought forward options to council One was to move forward with the installation of UV disinfection equipment at our current water treatment plant, which would, as the mayor indicated, restore our full capacity under cold water conditions. And so while that would be one option to have Collingwood's continue to provide both our customer municipalities with the volume that they are taking today, so to speak. Our recent recommendation through some recent reports to council state, have augmented the addition of UV disinfection by recommending the proposed reductions of supplies to our customer municipalities, as one form of kind of sharing the capacity restrictions that we're all feeling as we move forward with development in our communities until our plant expansion is complete. So in the report that's before you this evening, that is based on, and in the report that's before you, which shows that the full cost of the UV equipment is going to be borne by Collingwood, that's based on a decision that Collingwood Council made last year. And so that is why we carried that forward in the report in front of you today.
No, that does answer the question, but it doesn't change my opinion of the discussions that I was privy to 2010 and prior. It doesn't change the benefit of use discussion. I have had discussions with some of you and have sent information the past few years regarding that issue. I think this is tremendous work, and I'm just saying that from my perspective, I've not heard something that undoes my had not the ideal negotiations over the years to try and resolve this issue, and you've been stuck with it. I couldn't resolve it. Even we brought in federal people and provincial people looking for a resolution to the water supply agreement, and we were not able to achieve it. So I know that you're here today because we weren't able to solve that issue prior to this.
And right now we're without an agreement. So, yeah. All right. So I will call the vote then on PW 2022-6, water treatment plant expansion updates to scope and budget. All in favor of the recommendation? And opposed? So noted. And now I'm going to pass it to Councillor Jeffrey for 381st Street. And I think what we're looking for is a recommendation to put it on the floor.
I would recommend to put it on the floor.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Can I get a seconder? Councillor Berman. All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Director Valentine. Maybe you can give us some background on 381st Street, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I certainly can. The amendment proposed related to 381st Street is respecting an ICBL exemption request that has been live for quite some time, since actually June of last year. And it would facilitate a change on the property from a restaurant and multi-bay car wash to an office and retail use. And it's known as the Crozier Building, if that name is familiar to council. Now, site plan approval, Planning Act application is required for the proposal to proceed, and staff were tracking, and it was intended to be advanced through the March 2022 cycle of the Development and Operations Committee meeting in tandem with the ICBL exemption request. Unfortunately, the site plan approval application was unexpectedly delayed in order to make minor design and construction management plan changes. But staff have been working with the proponent for several months on this project under the assumption that the exemption request represents a unique circumstance where capacity would be returned to the system in an overall reduction of water use resulting from the proposed conversion. Nonetheless, when we did do a deep dive into the detailed engineering documentation, it was not conclusively demonstrated that there would be a capacity reduction. And staff are recommending at this time that we continue to work with the proponent. There's other potential data sources that we can look at to ensure that the conversion results in no more water consumption from the previous use, and ideally would result, as we had hoped, in a return of capacity to the system. So this put us in a bit of a difficult position because we do have the existing deadline set by council for ICBL exemption requests to go forward in March. And in recognition that the proponent has made business decisions under the assumption that the request would be considered by council prior to the ICBL expiring, we did deem it prudent to bring it forward as a request in advance of the Planning Act application. It's expected that the site plan application will be reviewed in April by the Development and Operations Committee. And if the proposed servicing capacity allocation policy is adopted, that would give the proponent an additional year to apply for and receive the necessary building permits to allow the project to move forward. So that is how we have come to the recommendation in the staff report to amend the motion with respect to an addition of a consideration for 380 First Street this evening. Happy to answer any questions if additional clarity is required.
Thank you, Director Valentine. Council, any questions or comments on that? I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. So that brings us then to section 10.2, which deals with staff reports from the SIC meeting that were not passed unanimously. And C 2022-9, election sign bylaw update. The recommendation to restrict the display of election signs to private property and make such amendments to the bylaw as required to prohibit election signs from being displayed on public property. And that motion was defeated by a vote of 5-3. I'm just going to look to Clerk Almas. So do we still consider the recommendation in its current form, or if it was defeated, does it come in the negative?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would recommend, just for the ease of the meeting today, that it's read the way it is and then voted to defeat again, if that's the will of council.
Okay. So the recommendation is on the floor, and I'll have it, I'll look for a mover and a seconder. So it's in its current wording, to restrict the display of election signs to private property and make such amendments to the bylaws required to prohibit election signs from being displayed on public property. Moved by Councillor Jeffrey, seconded by Councillor Berman. Council, go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Through you to the clerk, could the clerk just confirm there was a lot of discussion specific to this report? And I apologize that I didn't take the opportunity to look back, but the three recommendations that are before us, regardless of the vote, those are the three recommendations that were part of the original report. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I was trying to remember how I voted. That's all.
Other questions or comments, Council?
Okay.
Councillor Jeffrey?
I don't even have to notice my sign anymore. You can tell by my face. So in terms of, we did a lot of discussion on the public property, and staff as an alternate had proposed only 3 locations, but part of the discussion I'd brought up at the time was, if 3 wasn't enough, is 50 too many, and could we amend this to be maybe 25 as part of a weaning off process? So with this recommendation on the floor, I'm not sure it's a friendly amendment, so I would just like to know how to be able to have council consider the reducing to 25 as opposed to 50.
Yeah, I think it would be a change in direction, but I'm going to look to Clerk Almas.
That would be correct.
Yeah. So if you wanted to put that on the floor, Councillor.
Okay, I'd like to put that on the floor then, and if there's a seconder, great. If not, well, that's fine.
We have a seconder. So that basically, this motion was initially to restrict the display of signs on public property or to private property, and only allow 3 intersections, I think, for the posting of signs on public property. And what Councillor Jeffrey has put on the floor as a change of direction is to restrict the display of election signs to private property, save and except for up to 25 signs on public property, I think would be the wording. Yeah, and you'll second that, or do you? Okay. Questions or comments on the item on the floor, Council? I'm not seeing any, so then I'll call the vote. All in favor? And opposed? And that is defeated. So then I guess that does bring us back then to the initial recommendation, which is to restrict the display of election signs and make such amendments to the bylaws required to prohibit election signs from being displayed on public property. So I'll call the vote on that just to make sure we close the circle. All in favor? And opposed? And that is defeated. And the second recommendation is to remain status quo for display period for election signs, which I think in Collingwood is 60 days?
Correct.
Okay. And that was carried by a vote of 7-1. So can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Jeffrey? Any seconder? Councillor Hamlin, thank you. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? And opposed? Okay, duly noted. And I think that's a 8-1. Sounds like a Leaf game. All right. Third recommendation, remove the requirements of a deposit and identification stickers from the display of federal and provincial election signs. That was held at a standstill, so it was defeated by a tie vote at the standing committee. So to remove the requirements of a deposit and identification stickers from the display of federal and provincial election signs. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Jeffrey, Councillor Berman, all in favor? All right, and opposed? And that is defeated. All right, and that brings us to 10.2.3, C2022-11, interim appointment of mayor and or deputy mayor roles and responsibilities due to an absence or vacancy. And the resolution reads, staff report C2022-11, interim appointment of mayor and or deputy mayor roles and responsibilities due to an absence be received. And be it resolved that bylaw number 2022-13, being a bylaw to amend the procedural bylaw to implement an interim appointment system to be applied during an absence or vacancy prior to being filled, be enacted and passed this 21st day of March 2022, and this was defeated by a 4-4 draw at the standing committee. So can I get a mover and a seconder to put this on the table, please? Councillor Jeffrey, Councillor Berman. Any questions or comments on this, Council? Go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I was just wondering if I could have the clerk clarify again exactly what the ramification of this is. And it was very specifically that in a double absence of the mayor and the deputy mayor, that the alternate who has already been serving at the county would move up to the mayor position. And the intent of this is that council would appoint from within itself the deputy mayor and the new alternate. And I just want to be sure that that wording is exactly what was intended, because it's what I intended when I brought it up.
Right. I'm going to look to the clerk, and then, go ahead, Clerk Thomas, please.
Certainly. So this addresses section 2.5 regarding absence of the mayor and the procedural bylaw. So in the absence of the mayor and the deputy mayor, a member who received the highest votes acts in the place of the mayor. So the first example would be the deputy mayor, and then in the absence of both the mayor and deputy mayor, it would be the highest elected councillor would fill that role. Should they not take it, it would fall to the next individual. The report describes the difference between an absence and a vacancy. So a seat is not confirmed or declared as vacant until there's either a resignation or the missing of 3 consecutive months of meetings. So someone cannot fill that role. So when the role remains vacant, then if there is only one individual in the mayor or the deputy mayor's role, or there's not, it still carries on to the individual with the highest votes elected in the previous election, and it goes down so on. So the process that was brought forward in this notice of motion identified that during these temporary absences, that it wouldn't follow this the trickle effect of the highest voted in councillor member to fill that vacancy, that council would actually get to choose independently who would fill those temporary absences.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Councillor?
Yes, thank you. So it would be similar to what this council approved going forward for its vacancy per se. We chose to not follow the order of votes in the election, but chose to invite candidates. This is an outside process, but it's similar to that process. We would be, for just the absence situation, we would be following an appointment from within ourselves.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, Council? Go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. That was not my understanding the first time. So, and I thought we had clarity before, and I like that clarity a lot more because I get it totally changes my vote because that's not what I thought was brought the first time at all. At all, it's polar opposite. So, thank you very much for bringing clarity. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Worship, and I'm with Councillor Madigan. I misinterpreted that recommendation as well, and I voted against it. But now that I am clear that we were voting on a absence as opposed to a vacancy, this is a tremendous opportunity for any member of council to assume one of those roles should their peers choose them. So I will change my vote and support this.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councillor McLeod and then Councillor Carrier.
Thank you. I voted against this last week, and I will be voting against it again today. With respect, that's not the way that I read the report last week. What you have said, Councillor Doherty, and my understanding is that we would be throwing out the first past the post with this report, and that's why I don't support it.
Okay, well, I'm going to look to the clerk for clarification on that.
Certainly. I think the issue comes into a vacancy versus the absence. So an example of this would be in the event that there was a leave of absence or the event that the mayor and the deputy mayor were away at a conference. Who fills that role? It's the highest elected councillor, so that would become Councillor McLeod. And at this point, the next highest councillor is Councillor Madigan. He would assume the deputy mayor's role during the meeting. So if Councillor McLeod says that she would like to relinquish the gavel to speak to an item, it would go to the next highest elected councillor. A vacancy, if there is a full vacancy declaration that there is a vacant seat, then council will, by staff report, similar to what we've done in this previous election, look at who's best to fill the vacancy, and that would be decided by council, whether you want to go to the public or whether you want to do a direct appointment from within its members.
Follow up, Councillor.
Clear as mud. So the way that it stands right now is what you've described. And what was contained within the staff report that was defeated last week is a change to not automatically going to the next person and the next person and the next person, but to, in a temporary situation, the council choosing for that temporary position.
That is
until such time as the staff report comes forward, and then a choice is made about one of the several options that we have before us under the Municipal Act for filling a vacancy.
That is correct.
So this is about temporary absences. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Carrier.
Not to belabor the point, but through you to the clerk, in your comment, you said that if number one and number two assume the chair's duty and the vice chair's duty, and the chair steps away, then councillors would you would go to the next person. Wouldn't that be the vice chair?
So in the event of the chair and the vice chair being absent, then the two that assume the chair and the vice chair are the next highest elected councillors.
Right. Okay. I thought you just maybe maybe you just skipped over that point for the newbie. I just wanted to ensure that that's what you meant.
All right, I think we've had good discussion. Councillor Madigan.
God bless you. Thank you. I'm even more confused now. So this, what this vote yay is to change that. So right now I am, because we had an absence, I went to the county. So if the mayor steps away, I'm already at the county as an alternative, and say either our deputy mayor or Marion can't make it. Do I go, or do we then vote on somebody else going?
I think it's depending on whether
I
it's-
don't think I'm the only one confused by this. And if I am, let the public have fodder with this and have fun. But this is, yeah, please.
I think we're going into temporary versus permanent vacancy. Go ahead, please.
That is correct. So we do have a county councillor alternate bylaw. So this does not change the county councillor alternate bylaw, but yes, you are the second highest councillor. So in the event that the mayor and the deputy mayor happen to be away or temporarily absent, you would not get the opportunity to fill one of those unless council decides collectively that they would like you to take that role.
Under the new rules. Excellent. I will take back my change, and I will be not supporting this.
All right. Okay, I think we've got that clarified. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, then I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? And opposed? So noted, and that is carried. And that brings us then to staff report P 2022-9, draft plan approval extension request for Red Maple. And I'll read the resolution in. And it reads that staff report P 2022-9, draft plan approval extension request, Red Maple, be received. And further, that council approve a 3-year extension of draft approval for the Red Maple plan of subdivision, including amendments to the associated conditions of draft plan approval as contained in Appendix B to this report, with a lapsing date of March 25, 2025. And further, that given the pending lapse date of March 25, 2022, this report be considered at the March 21, 2022 meeting of council. And further, that the conditions of draft approval for the Red Maple plan of subdivision take into consideration a stormwater harvesting proposal subject to the outcome of the stormwater harvesting motion. And that was an amendment that was brought forward at the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee meeting of March 14, and this item was noted to be coming forward on shorter notice at that meeting. So I will look to the chair, Councillor Jeffrey, and Vice Chair, Councillor Doherty, to move and second that to get it on the floor. Questions or comments, Council? Councillor Carrier.
Sorry. The last and further that. Can we sever that, please, out
Yes.
of the motion?
Yep.
Thank you. My questions are on the first three. I did send a long list of questions, and I once again appreciate staff getting that back to me today. And it was really nice to see Senior
Go
Sorry,
ahead, Clerk Thomas.
we're getting a lot of feedback that we're not hearing Councillor Carrier.
Oh,
It wouldn't be the first time I'm not listened to, but
You're going to have to make sure
Oh,
you pull
it's
the
not that they're-
microphone. You
Oh,
can
I know. It's
move
me.
it closer.
it's me. It's not you. It's me. So I've asked to sever the last portion of the motion out, and I did send to staff a bunch of questions upon review of the staff report. And it was nice to see Senior Planner Mark Bryant do the presentation. It was very thorough, and I remember Mark from when I was here, and his opinions and views are greatly appreciated, and somebody that I am familiar with. But what I have a question is, this is the third, we've had 3 extensions, this is the 4th extension. What happens when you just let it lapse? What is that process like? I mean, do they go to the OLT? Do they say, hey, I met these conditions and you're being unfair, though we've been waiting for this development to move 3 other times and it's not, and now we're here for the fourth extension. And I asked that in the context that you've been doing some policy initiatives that I've certainly been waiting for. Your official plan review, which is nice to hear the draft is coming forward in April. You have the recommendations from the Affordable Housing Task Force, which I'm looking forward to those being delved into in greater detail. And your urban design standards, I'm anxious to see those. And I did ask a bunch of questions on how that affects this agreement moving forward, and staff has been quite helpful in answering those questions. But if we just let it lapse, what happens then if they can prognosticate or forecast?
Director Valentine.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the councillor. So there are a few options before council today with respect to this particular application. So the application could be approved as recommended by staff, which would provide a 3-year exemption. The application or the exemption could be approved with a different lapsing date, which would require the proponents to come forward in the nearer term than 3 years, potentially 1 or 2 years at council's direction, with a further extension application, and that would have to be evaluated against the planning policies and instruments that are in effect at the time. So as the council was mentioning, there's quite a bit of change anticipated in the planning instruments. So if there's a desire to provide a briefer extension and then have them come back when those instruments are in fact in place, then a future application would be evaluated in the planning context of the policies that are in play at the time. The risk with that second option is that Council has provided similar extensions to other longstanding plans of subdivision in the west end of the town over this past summer for a 3-year time period. And those developers are working as a consortium to extend and update the infrastructure, the municipal servicing infrastructure in that area. And then I think to the councillor's question, the third option would be to deny the exemption request, in which case the plan of subdivision would lapse. There is, as we understand it, a risk that the appellant could appeal that decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal. There's a few legal opinions on how successful that would be. Senior planner Bryant and I went back in the archives. Similar questions were asked over the summer, but it certainly is a risk that there could be an appeal of that decision.
Follow up, councillor?
Yes, so my reason for asking that is all of you have a greater understanding of when those policy discussions are moving forward and how quickly you're going to have access to that. And I'm putting it in the context that I haven't been here for 12 years, and I'm seeing subdivisions that I think I had some say on years ago that have been granted extensions and are finally moving forward, and the community's values has changed. I mean, it's not static. It's a dynamic set of data, and I would hate to see. I mean, the tree canopy issue is one that the gentleman was on your meeting as a deputation online, and I thought those points are valid. We've heard concerns about tree canopy and affordable housing and a whole bunch of initiatives. And you look at the development map, and we keep granting extensions. There could be opportunities lost, and an opportunity lost can never be found. So I'm not supportive of a 3-year extension. I would be supportive of a shorter extension or letting it lapse. What I'm really in favor of is the last and that. I think that's a great initiative, and that's why I asked for it to be severed. But I look to all of you if there's an appetite to look at something other than the 3-year extension. So I'm going to propose 18 months.
All right. And I'll look for a seconder to get that on the floor. Councillor Hamlin, go ahead. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Through to Councillor Carrier. I appreciate the comments, and as an avid follower of Councillor, I'm sure you're aware that during the balance of this term, there have been a number of developments that have come back to this table for extensions, and I stand to be corrected, but I think that we've had good discussion, good debate, and with rare exception, those have not been unanimous decisions. This, however, was a unanimous decision last week or when it was brought forward. And I think one of the key differences was given some of the moving parts that our director just spoke to, but also that it is a new owner. And I think that that's important from a contextual standpoint, that this property, as frustrated as we are in terms of not seeing something happen, we are dealing with a new party. And I think given some of the extensions that we've already granted, this would be consistent in the time frame that they're requesting.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Are there any other comments or questions on the amendment that's on the floor? I've got Councillor Doherty, Councillor Jeffrey, and then Councillor Hamlin. Go ahead, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'll thank Councillor Carrier for his comments because over the number of applications that we have had come up over the last 3 years for extensions, I have not been supportive of too many of them. However, in this case, I was prepared to support the 3-year extension for the reasons that the planner stated, that this would allow it to be in sync with 2 other applications for which we will require a significant front-ending agreement for infrastructure, water infrastructure. And because, and I will just confirm with the planner that number one, there have been a number of new conditions added to this particular the conditions for satisfaction that I think were good and are consistent with the direction that I think we want to head. And the other reason is because we do have the latitude to change the conditions as we bring our new OP on, as we bring our new urban design guidelines in. Otherwise, I would not support this extension, but because we do have that latitude, and I realize that there are risks to that, but I am satisfied with the basic plan, the fact that it's a change of ownership, the updated conditions, and the fact that those conditions can be further updated over the next 3 years, that I would support it.
Thank you. Next, I've got Councillor Jeffrey and then Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Councillor Doherty made the 2 points I had, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hamlin.
Yes, Councillor Doherty also covered what I was going to say. We can always change the conditions if our official plan comes out with a different approach. And also on the question of whether if we don't extend draft approval, if we refuse, I have to say I spent through one CAO and one planning director begging for a different legal opinion because I came onto this council being told that there was an appeal to that tribunal if we didn't extend draft approval when it was expiring, and that was not ever my practice or understanding of anyone I ever knew in that field. So by the time we got to our second CAO and perhaps third planning director, we did get a second opinion, and my view is that there is no appeal. So I've heard what Director Valentine said, but I just wanted to share you what I thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, then I am going to call the vote on this is on the amendment, which is to shorten the period of the extension to 18 months. So that's what's on the floor, and I'm going to call the vote then. All in favor? And opposed? Okay, and that is defeated. So we've got the main motion back on the floor, which is the 3-year extension, We've had good discussion, so I'm going to call the vote for that. All in favor? Opposed? So noted. And then that brings us to the fourth paragraph. And further, that the conditions of draft approval for the Red Maple plan of subdivision take into consideration a stormwater harvesting proposal subject to the outcome of the stormwater harvesting motion, which is on this agenda later in the day. I'll call the vote on that. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. So that brings us to bylaws. 12.1, it reads as follows. Be it resolved that bylaw number 2022-19, being a bylaw to appoint members of the Board of Management for the Downtown Collingwood Business Improvement Area, be enacted and passed this 21st day of March 2022. Can I get the Deputy Mayor to move that as our BI representative, and who would like to second that? Councillor Jeffrey. Any questions or comments on that, Council? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. So thank you very much to those two individuals for stepping up to get involved with our BIA. And the next item on the agenda is 13, a notice or motions. And so I'm going to pass it over to the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. And as you have already indicated, this motion, which was tabled as a notice previously, ties in to 11.1, which has already been previously tabled this evening. So I'll turn it back to you to table your motion. I'll look for a seconder, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Great, thank you very much. Motion reads, whereas Collingwood is a designated growth node under the provincial plan Places to Grow policies and was identified in the 2020 census as one of the fastest growing communities in Ontario. And whereas Collingwood is experiencing the impacts of this growth pressure on our municipal infrastructure, including on the capacity of our water treatment plant and our wastewater treatment plant. And whereas Collingwood has declared a climate change emergency, and recognizes the importance of developing climate change resilience in our community. And whereas Collingwood has identified sustainability as a priority under the Community-Based Strategic Plan and is partnering with the United Nations and Urban Economy Forum to champion UN Sustainable Development Goal number 11 to build communities that are safe, inclusive, sustainable, and resilient. And whereas as much as 1/3 of Collingwood's treated water is used to flush toilets and for other household uses, and town staff are currently working on phase 2 of a stormwater management master plan. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Council directs staff to prepare a report on how the town can work with developers to implement and install stormwater harvesting systems to A, capture and use grey water to flush toilets and for other household uses, and B, to capture and divert stormwater and reduce pressures on municipal infrastructure and reduce flood events.
Thank you. And looking for a seconder, Councillor Burnman. Are there any questions, comments, discussion? If I may, just my only comment would be once again to compliment you on the ability to draft something on the fly using top to bottom, left to right, upside down and backwards of a paper. It was quite the sight to see.
It was interesting, and it's the only, I made the most reading errors reading my own motion, so go figure.
So if there are no questions or comment, call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. And that brings us to Councillor Berman's motion, FCM Board of Directors election endorsement. Can pass it to Councillor Berman to read in his motion.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Before I do, I'm going to ask when you would like me to ask to have a vote to waive notice on this, because I actually submitted this about 10 days before your motion that we just voted on, and mine still appears as a notice.
Well, if you want to waive notice,
I'd like to ask for that because it is somewhat time sensitive.
Okay, yeah. So you can explain the need for waiving notice and then put it on the floor.
There are already municipal councillors from other municipalities that are already able to campaign and are campaigning for this. We were a little slow to get to it because we didn't get to read it in back on the 7th. So if council supports Councillor Jeffrey, I think we should give her an equal playing field with the other candidates.
Good. I'll look for a seconder. Councillor Carrier, we need 2/3 on the waiving of notice. So all in favor? That is carried unanimously. So you're over the first hurdle, Councillor.
I'm not going. It's not my hurdle. So I'll read this in as it is. whereas the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCM, represents the interests of municipalities on policy and program matters that fall within federal jurisdiction, and whereas FCM's board of directors is comprised of elected municipal officials from all regions and sizes of communities to form a broad base of support and provide FCM with the prestige required to carry the municipal message to the federal government. And whereas FCM's annual conference and trade show will take place from June 2nd to June 5th, 2022, during which time the annual general meeting will be held and followed by the election of FCM's board of directors. Therefore be it resolved that Council of the Town of Collingwood, Ontario endorses Councillor Kathy Jeffrey to stand for election for FCM's Board of Directors for the period starting June 2022 and ending June 2023. And further be it resolved that Council assumes all costs associated with Councillor Kathy Jeffrey attending FCM's Board of Directors meetings.
Thank you. Can I get a seconder, please? I've got Councillor Hamlin. And questions or comments? Councillor Madigan.
Thank you very much. As Councillor Berman so eloquently stated, that FCM is representatives are all elected officials, and I find it really odd, nothing to do with us doing this, but that they would have it as an offshoot because some people might either not choose to run again or not be elected officials. So when that comes, I'm going to look to actually Councillor Jeffrey just to explain to me, is that okay? If you say you, not you, but if somebody doesn't get re-elected, that they can still sit on this board of elected officials?
Councillor Jeffrey?
Through you, Mayor Saunderson, to Councillor Madigan. No, if you are not an elected official, you do not serve. So if I were not re-elected in October or decided not to run, the Ontario caucus would replace me with someone out of the caucus.
Okay, yeah, no, that was just for clarity. Since we're using taxpayers' money for this, I just wanted to make sure that, notwithstanding that they won't choose Councillor Jeffrey, she's an excellent candidate, but if they chose not to, that we would still be on the hook for this. So thank you.
Councillor Carrier.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just on the fourth paragraph, it says FCM Board of Directions, and it should say FCM Board of Directors. Councillor Berman read it incorrectly. It's just printed incorrectly, but for the record, it should be correctly. If we're sending one of our finest off to FCM, that the resolution should be spelled correctly.
As Councillor Berman caught that on the fly, I was waiting for him, asking for directions, but he didn't. Any other questions or comments? I just want to congratulate Councillor Jeffrey on her able and capable hand down at FCM in this difficult time through the COVID pandemic and everything that's flown or has arisen from that. And I know you'll continue to represent the residents of Collingwood and the residents and of rural Ontario at FCM in that important work there. So with that being said, I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. County report, we have a meeting tomorrow, so I think maybe we'll kick this down the road.
Yes, I think the last meeting lasted, 40 minutes? And was really just
Yeah.
So that would be appropriate.
I think it's a busy one tomorrow. Okay, all right. That brings us then to item 16, the consent agenda. And the resolution reads that council herein receive the general consent agenda, and further that the information and opinions provided in the general consent agenda items are those of the authors and are not verified or approved as being correct. We have 5 items today. 16.1, Proclamation, National Poison Prevention Week, March 20th to 26th, 2022, and the clock tower will be illuminated green from March 21st to March 25th. 16.2, Proclamation, Epilepsy Awareness Day, March 26, 2022, and the clock tower will be illuminated purple from March 28th to April 1st. 16.3, Simcoe County District School Board, letter to the Minister of Education re EDCs. 16.4, Nancy and Alan Eagleson, BIA Entrance Archway letter. And 16.5, Greg Taylor, BIA Entrance Archway letter. Can I get a mover and a seconder for this, please? Councillor Doherty and Councillor Jeffrey. So first I'll call to receive the consent agenda, and then I'll ask for any items to be pulled. So all in favor of receiving the consent agenda? Excellent, thank you. Any items to be pulled tonight, Council? Seeing none, then we'll get to item 17.1, old or deferred business. Is there any old or deferred business tonight, Council? Seeing none, other business. Any other business tonight? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, and through to our acting CAO. I'm just wondering with respect to our recruitment of committee applicants and to fill our committees advising council, if we've moved into a process with toward inclusion and diversity within our committees. And I know that answer may not be available tonight, but I would just be curious to know, and maybe a departmental update at the appropriate committee as to what stage we're at with respect to that. I know I'm doing a lot of training at FCM, and it's a lot of great work. And I've sent the links to FCM's free training and webinars with respect to those processes, and would like to know if we're being able to move down that road with our internal policies.
Thank you. Acting Treasurer, you are the Treasurer, you're Acting CAO. Quinlan, any response tonight, or do you want to take that back?
Yeah, I don't actually have a response. I apologize, but I don't know if Clerk Almas maybe does, but we can hold off and have CAO Skinner answer on our return.
Okay. Thank you. Any other business tonight? Councillor Carrier.
Thank you, Worship. I was actually kind of nervous coming here today, and I want to thank you all for making me feel very welcome. And I mean, if you know my history, you might be surprised I was a little nervous, but I was very nervous. And I also want to thank your staff, through you to the staff. What a great group. I asked a lot of questions. I hope, some difficult questions, and they were very thorough in their answers and very responsive. And it is an absolute delight to see the level of professional staff that the town has. And I just wanted to say that for my first day back, I greatly appreciate it and thank all of you.
Great observation, and I couldn't agree more. Your honeymoon's over. It's going to get worse. All right, and with that, then we get to 18.1, the confirmatory bylaw, and it reads as follows. The bylaw number 2022-20, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the regular meeting of council held March 21, 2022, be enacted and passed this 22nd day of March 2022. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Madigan, Councillor Berman, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, everyone. That was a busy meeting. Oh, yes, a motion to adjourn. Councillor Jeffrey, thank you. All in favor? I always think I'm done after the confirmatory bylaw. All right, good night, everyone. Thanks for joining us.